Alright, so this is the third video for 3.1. We're still solving quadratic equations, but this time we're going to do it by factoring. So that zero product property from the first page of the notes talks about the product of two expressions equaling 0. Okay, so if a parentheses x inside plus something equals something else multiplied times something else equals 0. Anytime two things multiplied together equals 0, that's what we're talking about, because when we factor, we're going to have things multiplying each other. Then one or both of those has to equal 0, and that's how we're solving for x. And that might seem kind of confusing, especially the way I explained it, but you'll see real quick. So if we go to number 7 in the notes, we practiced factoring when we did the chapter 3 opener. Okay, we're going to do the same thing. Here, we need 0 on one side, and we need all of the expression on the other side. So in this case, we have x squared minus 12x plus 36. So in that chapter opener, what we did was we multiplied a times c, which a is 1 in this case, and we get 36. And we need to find all the factors of 36. So things that multiply together to equal 36. And I get 1 and 36. 2 and 18, 3 and 12, 4 and 9, 5 doesn't go into it, but 6 and 6 do. Alright, so those are the factors of things that go into 36. Now, they multiply to a positive, which means both numbers have to be positive or they both have to be negative. So then you look at B, because they multiply to that 36, but they have to add up to negative 12. So if they're multiplying to positive but adding to negative, I know my terms have to be negative. And I need to find the two terms, when I add them up, they add up to 12. So in that case, that's going to be a negative 6 plus negative 6 is negative 12. So I know those are my factors. So I have 0 equals x minus 6 times x minus 6. So here I have two products. I have x minus 6, that's one, and then I have x minus 6, that's the other. Okay, they're multiplying each other, and they equal 0, which means one or both of these has to equal 0. So to solve for x, you set each of these equal to 0. Okay, so x minus 6 has to equal 0, and in this case, x minus 6 has to be equal to 0, and they're the same. So I don't need to write this more than once on this problem, and then you solve. So I get x is 6. Now, when we were graphing and doing vertex form, and we were doing, anytime we had x in parentheses, like intercept form, it's always the opposite sign. And this is why. Okay, so x minus 6, I have a minus 6, so I know my answer has opposite sign, so it's going to be a positive 6. Okay, so we can kind of skip these little steps. The only problem is with that is if there's a coefficient in front of x, which in these three problems there's not, and in your practice there's not yet, but there will be. Okay, so well, there will be when we get to the next set of problems. But in the factoring, or just solving by factoring, these ones, they're all going to have a coefficient of 1 in front of x squared, so no coefficient in front of those x's. But I do want to point out, this can be also written in another way. Since I have two things that are the exact same multiplied by each other, this is the same thing as this, still equals 0, okay? But we get one solution. So this graph is only going to hit the x-axis one time, and that's at 6, which means that had to be its vertex, because that's the only time a parabola will touch the x-axis one time, is when it's the vertex is on the parabola. Okay? Alright, so let's go on to number 8. Again, I want to get everything to one side, so it equals 0, and I like to leave x squared positive. It's much easier to factor when x squared is positive, so I'm going to move the 14x over by subtracting 14x, and I missed my 1 there, and then I have to add 40 as well. So I'm just moving them to the other side. So my equation becomes x squared minus 14x plus 40 is going to equal 0. Okay, so now I can factor this left side. Again, you multiply the coefficient in front of x squared, so that's a, which is 1, times c, which is 40, and I get 40. So let's write down our factors of 40. I have 1 and 40. I have 2 and 20. 3 doesn't go into it, but 4 and 10 does. And 5 and 8. Okay? Now they multiply to positive, so I know everything is positive. But they add up to a negative, which means everything's actually negative instead of positive. Okay? Because both terms have to be the same sign to multiply to a positive number. Okay. So I need to find the ones that add up to a negative 14, which is negative 4 and negative 10. So when I rewrite this, I get x minus 4 times x minus 10, and that equals 0. Okay, so really you set each of those parentheses equal to 0. X minus 4 equals 0, and x minus 10 equals 0, and that's how you're solving your equation. But if you recall, when things are grouped with x, you get the opposite sign. So I have a minus 4, so that means it's a positive 4, and I have a minus 10, which means a positive 10. Okay? If you have trouble remembering that, remember, you set these each equal to 0, so if I add 4 to both sides, that gives me an x equals 4, and you add 10 to both sides of this one, and you get x equals 10. Okay? Alright, let's go on to number 9. Again, not everything is on the same side, so we need to get this to the left side. So I'm going to subtract x squared, so that way x squared is positive, because 2 minus 1 will be positive 1. And I have to add 6x to both sides. So this gives me the equation of x squared plus 11x plus 28 now equals 0. Multiply a and c together and you get 28. So I need the factors of 28. I have 1 and 28. I have 2 and 14. 3 doesn't go into it, but 4 and 7 do, and 5 and 6 do not. So those are my factors. I need to find the ones that add up to 11, which are 4 and 7. Now, they multiply to positive, so I know they were either both positive or both negative, but they add up to a positive, so it's the positive ones. So I have an x plus 4 and an x plus 7 equals 0. Alright, now, if you can look at this and know, because the coefficient a is 1, and so you know they multiply to 28 and they add to a positive 11. If you can just see that without writing all the factors over here, you can go ahead and write it factored. You don't have to do this if you don't need to. But if you ever get stuck on factors, it's always good to write out all the possible factors. Alright, so then when we solve, we know that x is a negative 4 and a negative 7. Okay, before you move on to the practice, I want to show you another thing. Okay, you might get an equation like this, where c is 0. Well, so when you multiply things together, c being 0, 1 times 0 is 0, anything times 0 is itself, is 0, so it just makes it harder to see. It still works the same way, but look at it this way. Well, I'll show you two ways, okay? We can factor out an x, so I know x comes out of both of those, which means this x has to equal 0, and x plus 4 equals 0. So my answers would be 0 and negative 4. Okay? If you want to actually do it in parentheses using factors, and you know you multiply a and c together, and since c is 0, you get 0. So things that multiply to 0 would be 0 times any number. Okay? But we want them to add up to b, which is 4, a positive 4. So I know if I have a positive 4 there, I have my other factors. So I would have x minus 0 and x plus 4. And then when you solve, you get 0 and negative 4. Okay, so you can do those either way. Alright, now go to your practice and do 27, 30, 31, 32, and 33, and then move on to the next video.